Well, it's my live stream. When you know that something would go wrong, I wouldn't have the good sense to start the music before I actually come in with the picture. But what else is new? What else would you expect from a session of Chatting on the Porch? My name is Brian Trippett. I am your Front Porch Conservative. Welcome on this Thursday evening, August the 10th, 2023. I am so excited to be back tonight, and I am very excited to have the guest that I'm about to bring on. And we're going to give everybody a minute or so to get into the room as we start winding things down, at least from the introductions part. Social media is a very interesting sort of thing because you never quite know who you're going to run into. And that sort of sets up my introduction for my guest. I was on a live stream with Daniel and Brentley, the proprietors of the Dangerous Rhetoric podcast. And toward the end of the session that we were all engaged in, a young man came in who had been invited from earlier, but for various circumstances, he couldn't make it until the hour that he did, which is fine, not a problem. And the minute he started to speak, I'm like, oh, okay, I want to get to know this young man. And the longer he kept talking, the more I realized you really need to sit down and have a conversation with this young man. Because I have to say, and I'm going to pay him the compliment when he comes on here in a second, that given the age that he's at and his ability to articulate what he believes, I actually have a certain amount of hope for the future. Because if this young man is any indication of what's coming up behind guys like me, oh, okay. We're going to have our rough spots along the way, but I think the country's in good hands. He is the proprietor of the Pensive Politics YouTube channel. He is on Twitter. He's on various other places. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the inestimable Christian Watson. Christian, welcome to the Front Porch.
Thank you. No, you're very kind in your intro there. I never know how to handle praise like that. I've always been taught that humility is a virtue, but I do know that those kind of comments make me smile. So thank you very much.
Well, no, sir. Every word of it is true. I do not give false or unworthy praise. And like I said, that evening I was like, oh yeah, we're going to get to talk to this young man somewhere down the line. We're going to get to meet him, find out what he's all about and everything. And tell you what, it looks like you have brought the Christian contingent. I tell you what, the chat is lighting up with people and comments already. Glad to see everybody. We are live streaming right now on YouTube, on Rumble, on Twitter, and this is going to be a very, very fun evening. So how have you been today? What's going on? I tell you what, you are all over the place on social media, posting either videos or comments on Twitter. How are you? I mean, what's new with you?
Oh, I'm great. And by the way, I'm going to periodically mute my mic because apparently there's some echo going on, which is fine. So I'll just periodically mute it in between, so don't take offense. But yeah, I'm doing all right. I'm doing quite fine, actually. Things are going well, and we're just hard at work trying to start the revolution of the mind. I mean, you mentioned the future generations, and I think that's very, very important to understand because right now my generation is in dire straits. So one of the most loneliest generations in recent history. One of the most confused generations in recent history. You've got 20% of them identifying as a social category that has been pushed through several vectors in our culture, whether it be through the media, whether it be through social institutions, whether it be through other means as well. You've got them, they're the most doped up generation. Antidepressants and SSRIs have made a resurgence. I mean, they are the most detached generation. And I'm not trying to be negative here because there's plenty of reasons for hope, by the way. And the mistake that a lot of people make is stating all these facts that I'm stating to you right now and then saying there's no reason for hope. There is reason for hope. So long as there are people who have a vision and who are willing to conform their actions towards that vision, hope is alive. People don't realize that everything that came into being in this world was first a vision in the mind of a great man, or a not so great man in all honesty. But it was the vision in the mind of somebody. So I'm feeling inspired. I'm feeling happy. And I think that if more people understand what I'm trying to teach and what others are trying to teach through their commentary, through their content, we have a good future. But if people continue to stay in what I would call a dry place where they have no intellectual nourishment, they have no fruit, so to speak, and they're merely taking slim pickings from the influencers who have burgeoning audiences. They don't really care about the condition of their mind, or their soul, but care more about the condition of their follower counts, then we're going to continue to go into an era of tribalism, of bifurcation, and needless conflict. And that's my biggest worry. People ask me what's my biggest worry. That is that people will not listen, and we will continue to devolve as opposed to evolve. So those are some of my preliminary thoughts, but all in all, I'm actually doing very well.
Well, very good. Very good. Now, for those of you who are out there watching either on YouTube, on Rumble, on Twitter, and you're not familiar with Christian Watson, um, Christian, do me a favor. Give everyone an idea of your background. Where did you grow up? Give us an idea of where you went to college. What did you study specifically? Are you finished with your studies? And, having now, if you are finished with your studies, what is the plan? Are you going to be on social media exclusively? Do you plan to study further the law or philosophy, or where are you going in life? So I'd like to get started from right there.
Well, that's a very nice question to ask. I'll tell you this much. The answer I'm about to give you actually gave the few professors in college that actually cared about me a lot of heartache when I said it to them. Yeah. So we'll get to that in a second. But so I'll just be very brief in the background. I am 23, so my life is really just beginning. So I can't really say all too much. Because there's not all too much to say other than the fact that over the past 3 or 4 years, I have been pursuing a track to be a political commentator, public intellectual, kind of leader of the revolution of the mind. I've had some mild success. This will be one of the few times where I kind of tout my achievements. I don't do that normally, but I'll do it since you asked the question. Writing-wise, I have been published in places like USA Today, Washington Examiner, Washington Times, and nice places like that. Broadcast-wise, I have been on places like Fox News and Newsmax and all kind of stuff, Fox and Friends several times. And of course, I've had the privilege on my YouTube channel of interviewing some very interesting people like Scott Baio, who I'm sure you would know. Scott Baio, remember Scott Baio?
Yeah, I remember.
He's not from my generation, but I admire his acting personally. So I was able to do that. Sebastian Gorka, all those nice people. And so I've had mild success in what I'm trying to do right now. And of course, as you may have noticed from my social media feed, I am currently very much a fan of Vivek Ramaswamy, and he has been kind enough to amplify me. And I have nothing but really nice and kind things to say about how he has treated me. Now, of course, there are some policy issues that I disagree with him on, but as far as how he has personally treated me, nothing but kindness. He's been kind and open and generous from day one to me. I've gotten a chance to meet him several times in person, so full disclosure there. But as for where I see my career, I mentioned that I caused my professors a lot of heartache, primarily because I told them I have no interest in going to grad school. I have no interest in pursuing. Yeah, I had no interest in go. At first, when I got into college, I was like, I'm going to be an attorney. I'm going to be a constitutional law attorney. So I read a lot of Supreme Court cases. I read some books that changed the law. I studied a little bit of philosophy of law. I still have an interest in that, by the way, even though I'm not going to apply it in the legal sense. I still have a strong interest in philosophy of law. I did a lot of things, but I ultimately realized a few things. The legal profession is, number one, oversaturated. It's oversaturated. It is full of people who have like historic levels of career dissatisfaction, high rates of suicidality, and other things that come with having career dissatisfaction, family issues. And of course, correlation is not causation. There can be many reasons why that happens. But the fact that a lot of lawyers happen to have those problems, and the key factors that they're all lawyers, means that there's something about that profession or the pursuit of that profession that indicates that there's something wrong with it. So I'm like, you know what? For many reasons, this is not what I want to do. And always, within my heart, I've always wanted to be a public intellectual. That from the time I was 14, 15, when I first discovered Firing Line by William F. Buckley. That was actually, I was watching that during the breaks in high school. I thought to myself, I want to be this. I want to do this. And I thought being a lawyer would be a conduit to do that. But now thinking about it, I realized, no, it's not going to be a conduit. It's going to be an impediment. So I figured, you know what, instead of doing that, let me go and try writing. So I go ahead and I write for a year and a half. I write over 100 pieces. across publications, USA Today, Washington Examiner, Washington Times, townhall.com, all kind of yes.
And you were how old when you were doing this, writing for USA Today, all these different places? I'm really curious.
I think my USA Today piece had to be when I was 19.
Wow.
Had to be when I was 19. Had to be. Yeah. Yeah, when I was 19. So that was the first, thank you. That was the first iteration of my career. Now, I look back at that iteration of my career with a little bit of strife and strain, because my voice wasn't being heard. It wasn't really my voice that was being put on the pages and translated onto the digital medium and in print. It was the voice of the editors who looked at my pieces before they're published. And since I was young, I'm still young, but since I was younger then, and I had absolutely no experience, no foundation, I was fresh meat. I was the new kid on the block. So those editors not only put their own words into my mouth, they did it promiscuously. And they did it in a way that fulfilled their desires, and I could do nothing about it, because the whole goal is you have to publish in order to be taken seriously as a public voice. And if you don't publish, people don't take you seriously. They drilled that into my head throughout all the seminars and all the programs, because I was in a few programs. I won't mention the names, although people can find them out very easily if they look at my biography online. But I was in a few programs that helped me get published, and the main emphasis of those programs was that if you want to get media hits, if you want to go on radio and TV, which I had the privilege of doing a few times during that period of my career, you have to publish. And you have to publish particularly in big areas. You got to publish in big publications. So that was the game. That was the rat race I was involved in. But even then, I wanted to talk about philosophy. I wanted to give a different and unique take on the issues plaguing our culture. But I wasn't allowed to, because I didn't fit the narrative of whatever editor I was working with that day. So I eventually decided, after I was pushed out of one of the programs that launched my writing career, I was pushed out at, I think, age 20 or 20. I was pushed out at age 20 or 21. Either one of those ages. Still very young. I'm like, wow, what am I going to do now? I was heartbroken. I was devastated. I'm like, my career is over. I'm not going to be able to do anything now. And then I was told by somebody, you need to go and start a podcast. So I thought to myself, what do you mean a podcast? Isn't writing how you actually succeed in this world? What do you mean a podcast? I grew up reading George Will and Ann Coulter. Isn't this how you do it? Isn't this how you succeed? People are like, Christian, go start a podcast. I'm serious. I'm like, no, I want to be the next George Will. I want to be a syndicated columnist. I was dead set on being a syndicated columnist when I was 19, 18, 20. And I kind of laugh at that today, because 23-year-old Christian would laugh at that idea. He would not even think that's serious. The newspapers are dying, and good riddance, personally. I have many thoughts about that, but good riddance. The only downfall is that local communities will have less of an outlet to pursue truth, which is unfortunate. That's the main downfall, and I regret that significantly. But the big corporate, like Times-Picayune, all these places that we've seen throughout history, have actually assisted the intelligence community and the FBI in lying to the Americans on levels of mass deception about many issues. They can all die a death without 1,000 cuts for all I care. They can die miserably. So my apologies, but I have a bone to pick with the media that helped manufacture consent for decades. I have a serious bone to pick. It makes my blood boil. Different topic, different day though. So they said, Christian, go start a podcast. And I said to myself, okay, I know nothing about this podcast business, but let me just try. So I got my first microphone. It was a Blue Yeti black microphone. Bought the cable from Best Buy. Then I had the webcam that I'm using right now to transmit video to you is the webcam I used 3 years ago to start my first podcast. So I got this webcam, this C920, from I think I ordered it online from some secondhand tech dealer, and I started making podcasts. First year of my podcast, I managed to interview Joshua Wong, who was a Hong Kong dissenter, Nobel Peace Prize nominee, who's now been arrested by the Chinese government for being a dissenter, by the way. I interviewed him. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I interviewed him. I interviewed Jo Jorgensen, who ran for the libertarian presidential nomination and won. Interviewed her. I have thoughts about her now that we can get into later if you want to. I interviewed her vice presidential running mate. Then eventually I got to interview some of the bigger people like Spike Cohen, Scott Baio. I interviewed Scott Baio, and really, and Marianne Williamson as well. I actually got to interview her as well. And so really, I began getting wind under my sails. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. Then I decided, you know what? Okay, I interview people, but I'm not going to be Charlie Rose. As much as I admire his career, I'm not Charlie Rose. But what if I decide to offer my own thoughts in my own way to people, just me? That's what I did. So I started making videos on particular issues, just me, giving my own commentary. First video I seriously made. I made other videos before this, but first video I seriously made was probably why I am an Uncle Tom, something like that. And I was basically trying to say that the epithet used to denigrate Black folk who happen to think independently of the narrative is actually misplaced. And there are plenty of reasons to admire the character Uncle Tom that epithet is named after. And that video got over, I think, 1,000 views in its first week or so. And this is when my channel was at like 400 subscribers. I was like, wow, how does this work? And then I began to just produce content. But I wasn't serious, though. I wasn't serious. I produced content like every few days. And these were like longer, like 50-minute, 1 hour long videos that I would just sit down and talk about the events of the day. And really, people can go back to my channel. They're all still there and like watch my commentary on virtually almost any topic between 2020 and 2021, 2022, including J6. I did a full-length 1 hour podcast on the day of J6 when that happened, because I remember it distinctly. So that was a part of my career that I'm going to return to eventually, because those 1 hour shows have a lot of value. A lot of people that do well in this industry actually just still do those 1 hour shows. So I'm going to return to that. But then I decided, you know what? This takes a lot of production, and it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of editing, and I'm not really seeing the return in views that I want to see. So what else can I do to help my prospects here? Well, I decided to innovate, as I do. And I decided to go ahead and do standalone videos like I did with Uncle Tom and let that be my thing. And so I did that. I remember somewhere when you said Dark Wizardry was, oh my gosh, you are an OG Blue Streamer. You are an OG. So no, really. God, that was 2 years ago, maybe almost 3. Holy crap. Holy hell. Yeah. So actually, I'll give you the context for that one.
Okay.
Damn, that's a long time ago. So I'm not sure if you know a guy called Jacob Wool. You're familiar with him at all? This the con artist who engineered a bunch of hoaxes and got the media to come laugh at him at press conferences. Him and his attorney Jack something, I forgot what his name was. Well, Jacob Wool was doing a podcast tour, and he was open to coming to any podcast, no matter what. Whoever wanted to have him on, he would talk to. So I said, Jacob, come talk to me. He's like, okay, just give me a time and date. And so he comes on my show.
Okay.
I began asking questions. I'm like, okay, did Elizabeth Warren really have sex with that 25-year-old, former Marine? Did Pete Buttigieg really rape that kid, that boy, that man? Actually, they said that Pete Buttigieg sexually assaulted like a man, like a 19-year-old man. Like, did this really happen? He's like, well, we've got very, reputable clients. I'm like, no. And there was a point in that video where I just went crazy. And I said, you are a practitioner of dark magic. And I was just in a flow state of insulting him for like 3 or 4 minutes straight. And he was kind of overwhelmed. And he didn't know what to say, really, because he had known that I exposed. So then I said, why do you feel like you need to lie to get your point across? And he said to me, and this is on tape, I think, and I'm paraphrasing, I simply want to do what they do to us. I simply want to do what they do to us. That was his sensibility. And that's by the way, that's a comment that I hear the right use today in many other contexts. And I felt strongly as I do now, as I did then, that that's not the right approach. But that was one of my most memorable interviews that most people who follow me today have no clue even exists. That interview probably has 60 views. 3 years ago, 60 views. Most people don't even know it exists. And one day we're going to do like a Watson greatest hits compilation. My editor is watching, and editor, I'm not going to shout you out, but editor, we're going to do that one day. We're going to do a Watson's greatest hits compilation, and that's going to go at the forefront of it. But anyway, I know this is very long, but I'm going to get into the end, I promise you. So I decided to make video, and for a while, the standalone videos, they were doing decent, but they weren't doing brilliant. So I then decide, okay, let's see if I can collaborate with people. So I did 2 main collaborations, which launched my numbers a little bit up higher. And some people in this chat may know those collaborations. I did one with a, you know her, the woman who people don't want to talk about, and I'm probably going to get chewed out for even mentioning her name, but I don't care. Karlin Poroshenko.
I was afraid you're going to say that.
I know. And by the way, let me just preface, because just for people to know, because there was a conspiracy theory going around. I have no contact with that woman. She blocked me about 6 months ago because I don't deal with her, and so I just don't do that. I have no interest in that kind of craziness. I need stability and order in my life. So there's a conspiracy theory going on that I was still friends with her. That's not even. I never was friends with her in the first place. So, but yes, she was the first collaboration I did. I'll tell you this much: the collaboration did well. It got over like 27,000 views, and it was one of my first outlets that I could use to talk about the issue of critical race theory, because that was my first big issue. That's what I was, because I figured, okay, I need a hook. How am I going to sell myself to people? I need a hook. Why should you listen to me? Well, critical race theory. I had been in the debate team in college, and in the debate team in college, not only was I exposed to critical race theory before it was a popular thing on the national stage, I had read several of the prominent authors of critical race theory because people on my team were using them to advance their arguments. So I had seen their arguments and the consequences of them firsthand. Not only that, but I had seen an entire competition space debate dominated by those kind of arguments, so much so that if you argued outside of critical race theory paradigms, you were disqualified. My debate team coach told me that if you are a Christian conservative or a libertarian arguing in debate, you are disqualified. You just can't win. That's what he said to me. He's like, "Oh, you're not going to win. Never." That's what he said to me. So, yeah, go on.
Yeah. Since we're this. In what context did he mean you're not? If you're a Christian conservative or Christian libertarian, you're not going to win. I don't understand, because I'm 50. You're 23. I'm 51. So yeah, I'm on the backside of the hill. But I have old buddies of mine that I knew in college who were some of the most gifted debaters that I've ever met, with just some of the most nimble, fantastic minds. And I'll never forget, they went up to a debate tournament at Navy, and they were debating. The topic was, name one or more of the Supreme Court Bill of Rights cases or decisions that ought to be overturned. Well, you know how wide open that topic is. You're going to touch everything. Well, one of the things that got into was the infamous FCC versus Pacifica, the famous 7 dirty words case. Now, the college that I went to was extraordinarily conservative. And the Navy kids thought, they'll never say the 7 dirty words. They're not allowed to do that sort of thing. So the Navy guy gets up, looks at my buddy, and says, "Please state the 7 dirty words." And my buddy just rolled them all off. And the Navy guys were like, so when you say you're being told you cannot be successful, in what context are they saying that?
Well, I had asked him, I said, what kind of arguments, rather, do you have to run to be successful and to be competitive in college debate? He said to me, and I said, like, could you be a Christian conservative and run a Christian conservative argument and win? He said, oh, no, that would never win. Debate is a leftist practice. He said, debate is leftist. And if you want to be competitive, you're going to have to, hide some of your arguments, going to have to, truncate some of your arguments. So he was very open about it. There was no pretense of objectivity. There is no pretense of objectivity in collegiate debate, which is why I'll give a shout out here. James Fishback is doing a lot of good work on social media, trying to expose this problem. Vivek Ramaswamy actually just gave him $20,000 for a scholarship fund that goes through his institution that basically compels students, if they want to have the money, to tout the virtues of Americanism as a philosophy, which I think is a brilliant idea. So he's doing good work on this front. Michael Marino, he's now, people who are like real old school will know him. Michael Marino, he was the one who actually exposed a Professor Ryan Walsh at Utah University. He exposed him because that professor was having his team run cases like, we should send all white people to space to save black people. Yeah. So he exposed that. That got picked up by Daily Wire, Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, all in the whole 9 yards. Michael's kind of going MIA for reasons that, are both complicated and unknown as well. But he did some brilliant work, and I think some of those videos are still up on YouTube, and I encourage folks to go ahead and look at him. He was very big for about a year or so. And so, this is a well-documented issue. It's a problem, and it bothered me. And so I figured I have a foundation now to talk about what's happening. I have a foundation. And so I used that, and I obviously connected with Carlin, unfortunately. And then I also connected with someone called Gothics. Now, I'm not sure if heard of her, but I'm sure.
I love Lady Gothics.
Yeah. Okay. So I connected with her. And to be frank with you, that's where a lot of my early audience came from, because we collaborated multiple times. We did a few interviews. We did a video together as well that was posted on her channel. And then I think our last prime collaboration was a debate. Yes, the critical race theory debate, the infamous debate. I believe that was either in 2020 or 2021. Infamous debate. It was an absolute crap show. It's still up on the internet for everyone to see. It was a debate between me, Gothics, Carlin, and 2 leftist academics. I'll never forget their name. Aaron Rabinowitz and actually I did forget the other guy's name. Someone else who was pretty eminent on the left-wing Twitter sphere. An ethics professor. Oh yeah, Sam Hoadley Brill. I knew I had names more. Sam Hoadley Brill. Pretty prominent in left-wing Twitter sphere. Got published in Washington Post several times. Eminent podcaster. Philosophy student as well. So 2 philosophy students. 3 adding me onto it. And we debated, and they had no arguments. They had no arguments. So, but it was chaos. They clipped out the debate for days after that and just put it up on Twitter, making assertions that were not true about us, making claims that were not true about our intellectual integrity. I have a lot of problems with people like that. So I think that was probably the last proper debate I did. A lady had me on her show to debate anarcho-capitalism a few months ago. I don't consider that a debate personally. That was more so me just being there to be there, and me not really wanting to argue the issue. But she was nice enough, though. But I just didn't really. That's an issue that I really, to be quite frank with you, out of all the tens of thousands of things that I have to study, read, contemplate, debating if the state is morally legitimate is not one of those things. Not right now. That is a topic that people with a lot of time on their hands, who are trying to advance their understanding in a very esoteric area of knowledge, spend their time on. And more power to them. If I was a tenured professor at a university not trying to be a content creator, I would spend all day on that issue. And I would, because that issue is actually very complex philosophically. Because the moral dynamics of consent and the existence of the state is a very rich area to explore. And I think that many conservatives, at their own detriment, don't explore that area. Because American conservatism, I'm going to get a little nerdy here, American conservatism presumes as one of its moral foundations the concept of consent, the consent of the governed. If you're going to conserve in the perfect sense, as in conserving the values of our founding generation and the institutions that are spawned from that generation, then the consent of the governed has to be on your conservation list. And that the consent of the government is not just some fancy idea that makes us feel good. It's an assertion of a moral principle, consent, and also an assertion of a moral principle called harm. Harm and consent are the 2 moral foundations of conservatism in America. There's more, of course, but those are the primary two ones. And that's really how you can assess if something should be done or not should be done by the government or by someone else. And then you can use other criteria, whether it be virtue, ethics, or whatever, or a personal system of morality to assess what is preferable. Right? I like to make a distinction in my moral thinking. What is permissible and what is preferable. Consent and harm are the two ideas that regulate what is permissible. Virtue, goodwill, charity, being kind, altruism, sacrifice, all of that is what is preferable. So what is permissible, consent and harm, what is preferable, all those things I just mentioned, and more as well. And so I like to do that because oftentimes you see a lot of thinkers who are morally confused. I call them children in their moral thinking. Not really understand that distinction. And for that reason, make a bunch of terrible, terrible arguments because they don't understand that conclusion, that distinction. Now, that's just a little nerdy thing. But yeah, so I just, where was I going with that? I'm going everywhere right now. Where was I going with that? But help me out. Where was I going with that? I'm sorry.
The question became, where did you grow up, educational background, life goals after you finish education, etc. So no,
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
I'll tell you the same thing I tell all my guests, and that is, look, I understand this conversation is not about my opinion, it's about my guest. So the way I look at it is kind of like, here's a fence, here's a gate, here's a big, I'm going to swing that gate wide open. I'm going to let you like a, and please don't take this the wrong way. It's the best analogy I can come up with on short notice. Like a good thoroughbred horse, I'm going to swing that gate wide open, let you see wide open field, and I'm going to let you take off. You just
That's
go
nice.
as far and long as you want to.
Okay, yes, I know. I've recollected now. Okay, so point is, that debate was a crap show. And that was the last major collaboration that I did that I think boosted my numbers. I've done collaborations since then. I just had the great Robert Bavia on my show, talk about a lot of issues. We had an interview, then we also just had a video collaboration, which is great, about lawfare and the nature of lawfare. I've had Aiden Paladin, another good, smart, incisive YouTuber. She came, we did a video about the totalitarian roots of progressivism. One of the most important videos on my channel. It's also one of the most underrated. It's one of the most important videos on my channel. Seriously, if I was making a study guide for someone to look at American progressivism, I would give them a few videos of mine. I would give them a bunch of things, of course. I'll give them a lot of first primary resources, but I'll also give them a few videos of mine. I would give them that video with me and Aiden Paladin. I would give them a video I did about how progressivism is evil or whatever. That's another video that has a lot of rich resources. I would give them the lawfare video, because the lawfare video actually goes into the progressive era and how progressive jurisprudence infiltrated our legal system and informed the processes of our legal system over the course of time. I would give them those 3 videos and just have them go, because they would, if you watch those 3 videos, I promise you, you'll be more informed about progressivism, more informed than the average American is about progressivism. I promise you will be. Anyway, but yes, so since then, my collaborations, they've been okay, they've been decent, but it's more been about building up, not just the audience, but also building up the mind of the people that watch me. So I'm at the point in my career now where I have the most direction. I think I have the most foundation. I think I have the most confidence that I've had in a very, very long while. Because I tell you, a lot of people on my journey have told me numerous times. I had a friend send me a text message maybe 5-6 months ago. We were talking, friend from college, and he said, "Yeah, dude, I just don't see you as like a podcaster. You're more like a professor. I don't really see you as a podcaster role." And I'm like, "Why would you say that? You know what my dreams are. Why would you say that to me?" He's like, "I just don't see you that way. I just don't think that. I think that Tim Pool's a podcaster or whatever." And I didn't talk to him for 6 months. Then after I got over myself, I texted him. I said, "No, dude, that's not a cool thing to say. You're my bro. You're my friend. Like, why would you say that to me? That's not cool. I've known you for a long time. Why would you say that?" He's like, "Well, Christian, you shouldn't let that affect you. And, I had an opinion. Da, 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 da." I'm like, no. You said it. You meant what you said. And that was discouraging. And you know it as well. And so I've had a lot of that kind of stuff thrown at me, thrown towards me, a lot of discouraging stuff. I've had my clothing attacked. I had someone tell me that I dressed like an old man in the nursing home. Some of you in the chat will know who that person was. We won't call them out there, but I've had a lot of people, including some who have tried to help me and help me on my YouTube journey, give me a bunch of terrible advice and discourage me. But ultimately, there's also a positive thing about this. Through all those experiences, I've learned a lot. I've learned to be more reassured. I've learned to be more confident. I've learned to be more grateful for the opportunity that I have to be able to pursue this career path. So, wrapping up now, this is what I want to do. I want to be a political commentator, public intellectual. This is my career track. I have odd jobs that I'm doing in the meantime because we're not making a lot of, but I want to come to a point where one day I can quit those odd jobs and do this full time. So, yeah.
Wonderful. That is absolutely wonderful. Now, folks, as you might imagine, being that I'm the host of this fun little gathering, I always jot down my questions, and usually I leave enough room for notes on the side. Well, guess what? We've been at this for about 35 minutes now, and I am just chock full of commentary in response to some of this because I tell you what, I'm sitting here just in my mind, I'm rubbing my hands together going, oh, we've hit the gold mine. This is going to be fun tonight because I have found a kindred spirit. Um, you mentioned, I mean, I'll just, in no particular order of response to your comments, um, you talking about the vision of the people reminds me of an old proverb from Solomon, and I'm taking it slightly out of context. And it says, where there is no vision, the people shall perish. And that is so true, is that people have got to have something higher than themselves to realize is there and look up to and look toward, or else, if this, to borrow a line from that great Jack Nicholson movie, if this is as good as it gets, oh man. It's like, there's got to be more than the material. There's got to be more than I wake up in the morning, I go to work every day, I come home, I love my wife, I love my kids, they're great, but there's got to be more to life than this. um you know, as far as, you saying, I mean, Christian, we didn't really get a chance to talk much before you came on, but I have one fundamental rule on my electronic front porch. You can say anything you want. I don't care. If you want a pure free speech zone, brother, you have found it. Okay? So don't worry about self censoring to me. I don't care. If you say something I don't agree with, you know what? We're both grown adults. We don't have to agree with each other on everything. I can give you my line of argument. You give me your line of argument. You might persuade me. I might persuade you. But at the end of it, we walk away, we break bread, and we call each other friend, and, life is good. Now, oh gosh, you said something with regard to Vivek Ramaswamy, and it took me back, how kind he's been as far as amplifying some of your work. It took me back to something Marianne Williamson once said on a hot mic, and you might remember this quote. She was on a hot mic, she didn't realize it was on, and she made the statement as on some broadcast or podcast, something. She said, the conservatives are nicer to me than liberals are, and I'm a liberal. And that comment just stuck with me, always has for years. And I was like, yeah, Marianne, welcome to the party. We may not agree with you, but we'll at least be decent to you. You mentioned somebody that I'm going to bring up one of your tweets, and when I saw this, it took me back a little bit and took me aback. When I saw this, hang on, there we go. It took me aback. So let me pull this up for the benefit of everyone watching. Quote, Thomas Sowell, while great, has never been my greatest intellectual influence by any measure. This guy is. Now, I know who it is. Most people looking at this picture may not. I know people below a certain age will not. But would you do me three favors? One, who is this man? Two, what is that book he's got in his left hand? And number three, Why is this man your greatest intellectual influence?
So this is my spiritual father. No, no, I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm only half joking, actually. This is the great, the eminent William F. Buckley Jr., one of the greatest minds to ever enter politics in America, the sort of guiding North Star of the conservative movement for its first few decades. He actually helped form modern conservatism back in the late 50s, early 60s, when it was when different factions in American politics, particularly from the old right in the 1920s, which was more libertarian, were coming together to figure out, okay, how can we beat communism? That was the main emphasis on American conservatism, as anti-communism. There was more, of course, but that was the idea. And so Buckley was the shepherd of this alliance that was called fusionism, the sort of relationship between different factions of the right, the traditionalists, the Christians, the libertarians, classical liberals, all these different people that came together, and their base was National Review, which is the magazine today, which has fallen from glory, unfortunately. But back then, it was amazing. It was the vanguard of conservatism. It was the sort of bulwark against communism. It was one of the most powerful and enduring cultural forces of its day. And so Buckley was the head of all that. He also hosted a TV series that was on for decades,
Yeah.
like from like the 60s, like the 90s, called Firing Line with William F. Buckley, that was aired on PBS, I believe. So, which it's came back, but it's with Margaret Hoover, and it's not the same. It's not even close to the same. That's a different story, different day. So yes, that's who he is. The book in his hand is called God and Man at Yale. So Buckley's breakthrough moment was writing a book on his undergraduate experience at Yale University, particularly being critical of the leftism that had infiltrated the education back then. This is in the 1950s. So he was already speaking about the issues that we're talking about today back then, and he did so in a masterful way in many cases. And if you read that book, he very much sounds like a classical liberal, because he was a classical liberal. And a lot of people on the right, unfortunately, have deviated from the kind of system that Buckley and others in his era, like Barry Goldwater, another name that many people don't know these days, set up. These people, Goldwater, Buckley, who also influenced Reagan and whose ideas were translated by Reagan in part and during his tenure in office, these people were the guiding North Stars of American conservatism. And so, yeah, I think that, and I answer your third question, look, Thomas Sowell is great. I wouldn't dare take a thing away from that man. He is 93, 94, and he's still kicking, and he's still writing, and he's still doing things. He's not doing any speaking, but he's still writing, and he still writes brilliantly. He's still putting out books. And so he's almost 100 years old. I have nothing but respect and love for that man. Having said that, I oftentimes have seen in my own experience that certain people are elevated above others by virtue of exposure. More people have probably been exposed to Thomas Sowell than they have William F. Buckley. For many reasons. Thomas Sowell is an economist who writes prolifically about a different amount of issues, but Buckley wrote prolifically as well. Wrote prolifically, debated a lot in his life, was at the head of a lot of cultural conversations in America, produced a lot of literature on a lot of different topics, from anti-Semitism to conservatism to everything. He was a prolific writer, wrote spy novels, several spy novels. So that, in my opinion, Buckley should be more well known to the, sort of unenlightened, but walkaway types that are coming into the movement, whose first entry in the movement oftentimes is a video from Thomas Sowell, which is great. But what about Buckley? So I oftentimes think that overexposure has kind of numbed me to placing Thomas Sowell in that place in my own journey. But also secondarily, I think Buckley has a wider variety of insights into different areas of society. Sowell's primary focus was on race and economics, which, again, I don't take that away from him. He has done immeasurable work on those two topics. He has done immeasurable work on the issue of affirmative action, on the issue of the civil rights era. I have several of his books. He is brilliant. He's done immeasurable work exposing the folly of intellectualism as it is propagated by the university system, not as it is genuinely propagated by people who actually care. So I'm not taking away anything. I would never disrespect him. But I just think that people miss out on some of the other voices that were very important in forming the sort of cultural vanguard which keeps America and the Republic sustained. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, when I saw that tweet, it took me back when I was like 15, 16 years old. I had a ritual pretty much every morning that I was in school. I'd get up at about 6:15. After about 5 minutes of talking myself into getting out of bed, I'd go to the kitchen table. There would be the morning local newspaper. And I was one of those kids that I went to two sections and nowhere else. I went to the op-ed page, and then after I read the op-ed, I went to the sports. On the op-ed page, and this is back when my local newspaper carried a wide variety of different writers, which they carried at one time or another, the legendary Robert Novak, Art Buchwald, and they carried Will Butt. And when I was 16 years old, I was reading columns written by William F. Buckley Jr., and I came across him on Firing Line. And to this day, when I'm sitting in a chair, I'm doing the Buckley slouch. And because that was, I mean, if you ever watch Firing Line, he's just like leaning back, almost like he's about to go to sleep. And I do a half decent Buckley, which is, well, Christian, I can understand your different positions from mine on this, but you must remember that as we all look at the proponents of the evidence in this matter. So, I read Buckley. I was like, oh my God. And he doesn't not get the credit he deserves. I mean, God and Man at Yale was the seminal book that I won't say kicked off the conservative movement, because I'm seeing Blue Streamer here has got a really great point. You've got Hayek, you've got Milt Friedman and others, and it's like, yeah, there are other voices in the conservative movement, but when Buckley dropped that book, it was like letting off a bomb. It was like, what? Liberalism in college? What are you talking about? Now, that sort of gets me into something else. It's a two-part question. There's Buckley's brand of conservatism. You can make an argument there was the Goldwater brand of conservatism. There's Reagan's brand of conservatism. There is, loosely, I call it conservative today. If you ask the average Republican what a conservative is, I don't think they can honestly tell you. So I'm going to put the question to you. If a person that doesn't necessarily read the news, pay attention to the issues, but they hear the terms liberal, conservative. If the average person walked up to you and said, Mr. Watson, what would you define conservatism as? What does it mean for me? What does it do, this thing you call conservatism? You would say what?
Do you want the academic answer or the generalist answer?
Well, make it like a scotch and soda and put it in a glass, and let's see what we come up with.
Okay, I'll give you both.
Okay.
The academic answer. American conservatism is a political philosophy which is predicated upon the values of the founding generation of America, and then secondarily, the institutions, norms, and traditions that those values spawned. Academic.
Okay.
Generalist. Being a conservative means you believe in ideas that are higher than yourself and that compel your obedience and have social consequence as a result and are rooted in the nation's history. That's the generalist answer.
Okay.
So now I should also specify this is the American answer. Now, in the canon of conservatism, there are a lot of thinkers. In fact, some academics would actually point their finger at me and say, Christian, you're describing some watered down version of classical liberalism, which is libertarian light, which is not conservatism. That's a debate happening on the right now. So I must specify, within the American context, what it means to be a conservative is exceptionally different than what it means to be a conservative in Britain, in Germany, in Israel, or any other country. The Anglo, you oftentimes hear the term Anglo-American. Okay, well, the Anglo, the English, the British idea of conservatism, well, that doesn't really have much to do about universal ideas that can be deduced by thinking. We would call that rationalism. That's the technical term for it. But all that means is that you think that human beings who think can discover a lot of things and do a lot of cool things. That's what rationalism is. Some people think that thinking by itself or primarily is not sufficient enough. And there's a big debate in philosophy over that between the rationalists and the empiricists. That's a very convoluted conversation, but still, that's the cliff notes. So someone who is a British conservative might say, being a conservative in the crudest sense means I want to conserve the traditions of my country, the monarchy, the vestiges of the empire, the English language, these kind of things. I want to teach our history. Because in the general sense, being a conservative is really a context-specific idea that will differ from country to country. And it's not even an ideology, it's a sensibility. Now, when you get to sort of ideological conservatism, which is reinforced by a little bit more deeper philosophy, you'll get people like Edmund Burke, who was a very prominent philosopher back in the founding generations era, who was opposed to the French Revolution, was very much a conservative in the proper sense, in the British sense, rather. And his idea of conservatism actually is based on traditions and practices by a particular people in a particular country in a particular area. So this whole idea of universal values or natural rights, Edmund Burke has no time for that, because he's worried about the particular people in a particular area who had particular ideas that are going all the way back throughout their history, which is why Edmund Burke didn't like revolution, because revolution disrupts that tradition of state power. Naturally. So that's another version of conservatism. Then you have people, and this is going into the weeds, but stay with me. Then you have people who will draw heavily from Burke, but they'll also draw heavily from Aristotle, and they'll draw heavily from a lot of Christian philosophers like Aquinas. And they will say, okay, adding on to Burke or adjacent to Burke, conservatism is about specific people in a specific area in the nation, but it's also focused in the idea of the community in these broader groups that are more significant than the individual. This is what the post-liberals, as they call themselves, would call their version of conservatism. There are Yoram Hazonis, for example, Adrian Vermeule, Patrick Deneen, Josh Hammer. Some of these names may be familiar to the audience, some of them may not. I'll explain all in due course. These people believe that the classical liberal foundations of the American founding, the idea that moral agency is rooted in the individual and flows from the individual being the primary consideration in society, not the only, but the primary, and that being against a backdrop of broader universal ideas, they believe that that framework has led to a lot of cultural rot and decay, which has overtaken the society. They would tell you, a post-liberal would tell you, which is why they're post-liberal, they want to go beyond that classical liberalism. A post-liberal would tell you that classical liberalism, this emphasis on individual freedom, is not sufficient to stop people who would seek to take that freedom away from doing so, because it allows those people an open door into the system to then take control of it and then destroy anyone else at their whim. So they argue for a much more closed conception of politics, a much more rigid conception of politics, a much more community-based conception of politics. More importantly, they will urge a non-neutral idea of politics. So what does that mean? Well, classical liberalism kind of presumes that political institutions should be neutral towards matters that happen in your private life. So, for example, if you're gay, if you are a goth, if you have a particular way of expressing yourself that does not harm someone else, if you are a woman and you want to dress a certain way or talk a certain way, the classical liberal will say, whatever you want to do, that's up to you and the people in society that you're organizing with. Now, some more philosophically based classical liberals like me would say, it's up to you, but here are some helpful suggestions, right? It's important for you to have goodwill amongst your neighbors. It's important for you to, whenever you feel like it and you can, and you are able to, maybe indulge in charity a little bit. It's important for you to be kind and keep your words. I mean, these are not things that I'm going to take a gun and force you to do, but it's important for you to do these things. It's not just all freedom, freedom, freedom. No. It's freedom, but we also want you to pursue some good behaviors. But I can't make you do that, though. I can't make you do that, or else it's not you pursuing the behavior. It's me compelling you to be an actor. I said this in my video today. Whenever the government forces you to be a virtuous person, they're not making you a virtuous person. They're making you a good actor. They're making you a good actor. So no, we don't, and I don't endorse that. The post-liberals will say, no, the government should have an opinion on gays, on women, on everything, and that opinion should be enforced upon them by coercion. They say that, and they say that this is the only way to protect society from degenerating. I think that's the exact opposite of what is true, but they make a compelling argument. And guess what? A lot of people, especially a lot of young folks on the right, they are taking hold of this idea and they are clinging to it and they are pursuing it. And it worries me because Buckley would have been scared. Goldwater would have been scared. I mean, if you listen to those two, these were not hedonists that are just like, oh yeah, live and let live, go have sex with your neighbor. No. These were deeply conservative men who also understood that there's no use in having a free society if people can't also be free to be failures or to be degenerates. There's no use in having a virtuous society if people can't be free to not be virtuous. You have to have the capacity to choose virtue or to reject virtue. And if you don't have the capacity to choose virtue or reject virtue, you can't do either. I'll say that again. If you don't have the capacity to choose virtue or reject virtue, you can't do either. Buckley knew that. Goldwater knew that. These deeply conservative men, Christian men who are not hedonists, Buckley, he literally said he thought that homosexuals should have a tattoo on their butt if they have AIDS. So he said that. I mean, so this was not someone who's like live and let live. He said some pretty gross things that I don't agree with. Deeply conservative man, even he understood this. So we have to ask ourselves a question. If even these deeply personally conservative men understood this, why can't the younger folks understand this? Well, and some of the young folks, a lot of it has to do with impulse. Most people don't make their political calculations from first principles, from a rigid philosophical evaluation of the issues. That's not how it works. I wish it worked that way, and I'm actively pushing people to work that way or to consider that protective at least. But that's just not how it works. It's not how it works at all. I wish it did. Would live in a much better world if people actually had a first principles basis to everything they believe. Yeah, see, okay, go on.
Have you ever heard of public choice economic theory?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
We're going to come back around to that one. Continue. Thank you.
Right. So we would have a much better place, in my opinion, if that happened. But that's just not how it is right now. Human beings, while we are creatures of reason, are often victims of impulse. And as victims of impulse, perpetual victims of impulse, because sometimes impulse feels good. It's not necessarily always a bad thing to us. It feels good sometimes, even though it's not good for us. It feels good. We can become addicted to it, like become addicted to video games or things like that. So you have someone 19, 20 who's a follower of Nick Fuentes that thinks that the biggest problem in America are Jewish people. Well, they're led by impulse. You've got 19, 20, 21-year-olds who are followers of like John Doyle who think that the time to have power be neutral and regulated by moral ideas has passed, and we have to use our power to crush our enemies. They're motivated by impulse. When you have, you remember this guy, Pat Buchanan. You have a lot of young people going back to the 1990s when Pat Buchanan launched his belief, watching his original speeches and being animated by those. When you have Pat Buchanan is someone who can't even go into mainstream environments anymore because he's a white supremacist now. I mean, he literally writes for American Renaissance and all that kind of stuff. He decided to go down that path. Unfortunately, he was a brilliant man. Didn't always agree with him, but brilliant, very, very smart guy. Went down that path. A lot of young folks are inspired by him as well. So the right is having a sort of identity crisis. That kind of goes back to your original question: what does it mean to be conservative? And you can probably detect the kind of version that I push. And my suspicion is that you are at least, if not, and if you don't endorse it, you're at least sympathetic to that kind of version of what it means to be a conservative in the American context. But It's not that same way for everybody. I think there is enough people that I can do the content I'm doing and reach people, but there's a increasingly growing amount of people who are deviating from this thinking. I'll give you one example before I get back to you.
Okay.
I was involved in this organization, and I'll just say the name. It's called Uncensored America. I wasn't really involved actually. I had an informal role, and I promoted them for a few videos. They basically their entire premise was we go to college campuses, and we set up debates, and we are free speech. They're a free speech organization. They hosted people like Destiny and Bilo at debates on campuses and things like that. That's their MO. Well, within the group, I noticed that a lot of the people I talked to didn't really believe in free speech in the total sense, is that they believed in free speech in an instrumental sense, that they believed that free speech could benefit them, but they didn't believe in the premises of free speech. What is speech? Speech is a faculty, a component of the human being that allows him to make sense of the world through language, through words. It is unique to man. Animals do not have speech in the sense that we have speech. They can communicate, but not with words, with sounds and noises and gestures. Man is a little bit of a higher creature than that. We can communicate with words, and those words allow us to understand reality. But that faculty is contained within a foundation, a body that is animated by freedom. So if you believe in free speech, that presumes you also believe in the inherent freedom of every individual human. But if your active goal is to suppress that by way of trying to force your viewpoint onto others through government coercion or other kinds of tactics that are not moral, then you don't believe in free speech. You are at best an instrumentalist. Yuval Noah Harari, the WEF's galaxy brain totalitarian, nutter who cooks up all of their ideas, transhumanist as all hell. He said in a Guardian piece titled "The Myth of Freedom," well, I support liberal democracy because liberal democracy is the best political system that allows us to talk about the future of humanity. As a euphemism for saying liberal democracy is the best system that allows me to indoctrinate people and push my tyrannical vision of the world onto them. So he doesn't actually support liberal democracy in the moral sense. He supports it because it is instrumental to his goals. Well, that same kind of thing is what's happening right now with young folks on the right. And it's sad. It's so sad. It's such a far cry from our intellectual forefathers like Buckley and Goldwater and all of them. It's such a far cry from that era of conservatism, which really animated the American spirit. It's such a far cry. And so I actually have a video series on post-liberalism. It's not complete yet. I stopped it a few months ago, but it's called Post-Liberalism Explained or something like that. And I go through the concepts, the presumptions, the thinkers, the books of post-liberalism, and I explain this is what's happening on the right now. And oftentimes when I say the word post-liberalism, I get blank stares. I'm like, oh, post-liberalism. Read up on it. Because if you don't understand these movements, these ideological movements, you're not going to understand what's going to happen over the next 10, 20, 50 years within our politics. Because these movements are taking hold, and they're taking hold fast, unfortunately. So that is the end of my very long spiel there.
And a complete answer, which is part of the reason why I like talking to you, because I did my homework, or tried to do as my homework as much as I could as a good host, checking out your tweets, more particularly checking out your videos. And before I get to my next line of questioning, I will pay you the compliment, sir. One of the things I enjoy about your work is there's a beautiful line of argument. I can follow you from A to B, and I'm like, okay, this point leads to this leads to this leads to this. And for someone like me, it's like, thank God someone's finally making a coherent argument. Lord Jesus, thank you, I'm delivered. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of things to respond to. You touched on something that Buckley and Goldwater understood, and that is, you know, I call it libertarianism in the absence of social conservatism. Now, we can argue what social conservatism is, but at its base, it has certain foundational principles. There is a God or a creator that has endowed man with what it is he wants him to be. He's tried to communicate this. Now, how his creation understands what it is that he wants his creation to do is obviously flawed by the fact that we're frail, failing human beings. But there is a creator. He's endowed us with what he wants us to do. He's given us a moral set of principles that he would like to see all of mankind live by. And in that, and I go back to Jefferson, I'll go back further to Locke, that, the beautiful thing about John Locke in the Second Treatise on Government, the old argument up to that time was God gave power to the king, and the king in turn would distill it down to his subjects and give them what he felt should be their rights. Locke comes along, takes a stick of dynamite, lights it, throws it in the middle of it, and says, oh no, we're going to blow that up right now, and say, no, God gives power to man, the subjects, and in turn surrenders it to the king so that the king may do for the subjects what they themselves cannot do individually or collectively. Yes, sir.
As a reader of Locke and a student of the Enlightenment natural law tradition, which is one of my favorite areas of philosophy, I must say that is one of the most concise, succinct, and beautiful explanations of Locke's project in the Second Treatise that I've ever heard, even from, and I've read academics and everyone. That is beautiful. I must commend you on that. Sorry, go on.
You can thank a gentleman who I hope someday he watches my work, my old college professor, Mr. Steve Witham, who I can remember sitting in his ancient political philosophy class in college, and he is the one that more or less gave me that argument. And going on 30 years after my undergraduate work, that still sticks with me to this day. So yes, as far as, but libertarianism, or let's just say economic libertarianism, or just libertarianism in general, does not work in the absence of social conservatism. It can't, because what's going to happen is vice takes over for virtue. And, if man does that which is right in his own eyes, okay, then what's the point of law? What's the point of you looking at me saying, well, no, that's wrong? No, it's not. I think it's right. I can do whatever I want. I am my own person. I have the right to say whatever is right for my life, and I can do whatever I want. As long as I'm not bugging you. Well, now wait a minute. What if you're not bugging me, does bug me? And on it goes. So I mean, I agree with you there. I will disagree with you slightly on one respect. And you said that people don't necessarily go through a calculation of making decisions. And I hope I'm not misstating what you said. So if I do, forgive me in advance. And you indicated that you're familiar with public choice theory. For those out there watching, and this is the inestimable Christian Watson. I'm Brian Tripp, the Front Porch Conservative. This is Chatting on the Porch. And we're talking about all things philosophical and political. We'll get to some modern politics or things going on here in a little bit. But public choice theory, I have loved this economic theory ever since I was an undergraduate, because to me, absent altruism, it can almost explain everything. Man is rational. Not to say he's a PhD, but he's rational. He is self-interested. He has unlimited wants, but has limited means. Therefore, man, in his attempt to maximize the most ends with his limited means and satisfy his self-interest, will exercise his rationality to assort his means to achieve the greatest amount of ends. So, and I'm not saying that every person sits down for 20 minutes and runs through this before they decide which candy bar do I want to buy. But I don't know. I don't know about the argument that people don't necessarily go through a calculation when they're making a decision. So, and you can feel free to respond to that here in a second. Now, let me go ahead.
No, go through your other points. I'll get to that in a second.
Okay, all right. Let me talking about the age in which we live, and I'm dying to get your take on this. It's a 2 or 3 part question, and I'm going to give you a lot of room to run here. Why is it that the left, and I'm broadly defining that, the left, progressives, whatever, why don't they want to debate? I am loath to understand this. I mean, hell, we've got a damn First Amendment that gives them free speech. We give them the right to free assembly. You can go anywhere you want and espouse your views. All folks on the right are saying is, come to the intellectual square and let's debate these questions, but they won't do it. And that sort of gets to part two. When did we lose the ability to have a conversation with each other about what we believe? And third, how do we get it back? Floor is yours.
Oh, well, okay, I'll say that this is one of the, I'm going to flatter you a little bit here, but I mean every word before I get to the answer. This is one of the best conversations I've had in a while. And the OGs who have been following me, some of them are in the chat, they can also attest to you. This is probably the happiest I've been in a conversation in a very long while. So thank you. This is brilliant. Thank you for inviting me. Okay, on to public economics. So I think you understood a little bit of what I was saying, but let me clarify a little bit.
Okay.
So I don't think people go through a first principles, philosophically rigorous calculation on their political beliefs. Not everyone does that. Some people do. I do. Like whenever, I'll give you my method for making a video. I go to the news or I go to an issue that's in my head. I think about it. Then I say, okay, I believe in natural law. I believe man's a creature of reason. I believe in natural liberty. I believe in personal morality. I believe it's like a tree. Natural law is the tree in all these different areas. Personal morality, epistemology. They go all the way over across the sky. And I'm just thinking to myself as I'm going across the sky in my little head here. I'm just thinking to myself, how can I connect all of these branches? If you could connect branches, if they were that elastic, you can't really do that in the real world. But how can I connect all these branches to one point where they all meet on this particular topic? The topic's in the middle, and the branches are like coming over and connecting with it. How can I do that? And the video I did today on Sam Harris, I kind of did that. I'm thinking, okay, Sam Harris says he touts this unrealistic hypothetical where the vaccine's 100% safe, and there's like a 75% mortality rate with Ebola, and that would necessitate government coming in and forcing you to take the vaccine. He touts this idea and then says, and then he goes to a different scenario, which is more realistic, and then conflates the two scenarios and then tries to draw a moral conclusion from that. I'm like, okay, what about this would challenge my natural law presumptions? Okay, well, natural law tells me that in order for man to be a moral agent, he has to be able to use his free will, which is processed through his ability to reason, which is innate to his human being. Okay. Well, Sam Harris's idea here kind of rejects that premise and doesn't even justify the rejection, just rejects it on the basis of a consequentialist ethic, which says that if it produces a good outcome, it must be good. It must be beneficial. When in all reality, that's not the case. There are plenty of things. First of all, the outcome of any particular given thing will be beneficial to some people and not beneficial to others. If, for example, you go ahead and if someone, for example, if a company buys up a lot in your neighborhood and they build a big development on that lot, and there's a bunch of noise, a bunch of racket, and you have kids in the house, that may not be beneficial to you. Now, you could argue that the social capital and economic capital that comes from the development might be good for you. This is what happens with gentrification, right? Property owners go into certain areas, they buy real estate, and that jacks up the property values of the area, and dying areas can actually become rehabilitated, even though people would argue that kills the culture. But anyway, you could try to find some benefit. It would be really difficult. Most people don't want a big development, especially if you're in the mountains or rural area. I lived in a rural area for 3 years of my life. The biggest complaints of the locals was that companies are coming in, buying up land, buying off farms, and building things in the middle of valleys that were used to be pristine and have deers running on. They were destroying the land. So someone loses and someone wins. Now, every situation is not like that. Not every interaction in human life is zero-sum. But that happens oftentimes. So how can a consequentialist account for that? Well, what the utilitarians do, they say, okay, there's conflicting interests, but what the majority want is what we'll go with. Okay, that leads us to a bunch of other issues. So whatever you do, consequentialism is not a stable philosophy. Run as far away from utilitarianism and all that kind of stuff as far away as you can, because it will lead you nowhere but into a numerical fallacy. Because it's not even a moral. I think to call utilitarianism moral is like calling. It's like I don't know. It's like calling a human thumb the thumb of a chimpanzee or whatever. I guess in some instances it is, but it's not really, because they're a lower form of our current form, right? That's just not what it is, right? Because that's just not what it is. I don't even know how. It's not a moral theory, because moral theories should be able to tell you how to conduct yourself according to higher principles. But if the only principle you have is what the majority want, you can only conduct yourself towards the desires of other people, and not just any people, most people. So you'll be conducting yourself constantly into situations that may not be advantageous to your well-being or the well-being of society or whatever. So that's that. So I go through my sort of methodologies and my philosophies, and I try to deduce how they would fit into particular areas. And that's my process of really making videos. That's how I do it. It's complicated. It's convoluted. Most people don't go through that. Most folks are like, oh man, these kids at the school are being taught critical race theory. I'm angry and this is not good. And by the way, that's a good sensibility. Have that. Keep that. That sensibility is actually what caused Loudoun County, which caused a lot of parental revolutions in America. So keep that. I will never denigrate that. But that's what it is. It's like a surface level passion response. So that's what I meant. I didn't mean that people don't.
Okay.
Although public choice economics kind of. Here's the thing about economics in general, especially microeconomics. I believe economics is the only valid social science because it's the most objective. But having said that, economics tends to have a very simplified view of the world. Let me give you an example. Butter and guns. know that classic graph? Butter and guns, supply and the demand chart, and trying to show comparative absolute advantage. You know all that? Okay, that's actually kind of complicated because most nations are not looking at, okay, butter and gun, which one should I trade? No. That's a very basic and limited idea of how comparative and absolute advantage work as concepts. And so economics tends to simplify things to fit them into its premises. That doesn't mean it's incorrect. In many cases, it is correct. But it will oftentimes be a little bit too reductive for me to rely on that totally. But having said that, public choice economics is actually a very good metric. I think that it's a good social science. And I think that it can be very useful. But as Bluestringer just said, yeah, it is a study of like how scarce resources are allocated. And so it has value, but it's very limited in the implications that we can take from it, which is why I think, again, Thomas Sowell is great, but he's an economist. And there's a little bit more that I think you have to have in your wheelhouse in order to have a rich thinking. Not rich thinking, full thinking, rather. All right, so on the topic of why does the left, and by the way, if you ever want to respond to what I'm saying, please let me know. I don't want to dominate here. But on the topic of why the left does not debate, okay. I have a few answers to this. I'm going to put a few qualifiers to this answer. So when I say the left, I'm going to talk about largely the ideologies that reside on the left-leaning spectrum within the United States conception of it. So progressivism, environmentalism, race progressivism, woke progressivism, things like that, socialism, all that kind of stuff. So, and I'm also going to be American-centric here as well. These ideologies don't presume free and open discourse in the pursuit of truth. These ideologies presume that, how do I say this? I'm trying to be very careful how I word this so this is precise. These ideologies presume that give me a second.
Okay.
These ideologies presume that they heavily presume a utopian ideal that is foreign to reality as their ends. Think about this. The ends of progressivism. Well, let's go back to the progressive era, which was this period in America where progressives, their social theories, their politics really had a time and have been with us like a bunch of cockroaches for a very long time since then, over 120 plus years ago. The entire goal was an area of reform, not just reform of the existing institutions, but transformation of those institutions in the image of this egalitarian ideal, a society where no one wants for anything, a society where material resources abound, a society where the demands of the collective and not the individual self-interest are presumed as sacrosanct. When you have a framework like this, what benefit is there to debate anything? First of all, the individual is debased. The individual's own personal sentiments really don't matter. The pursuits of the group and the collective are what matter. If you're a Marxist, everything's already predetermined for you. There's going to be some mythical point in time where the proletariat come up in society, overthrow the bourgeoisie, and institute your utopia of heaven on earth. Buckley called it immanentizing the eschaton. Beautiful way to say it. Don't bring heaven onto earth. That's what they tried to do. If you're a progressive, you don't want the exact same thing, because obviously progressives are distinct from communists, but they do want to have, want to force a version of egalitarianism as a force in government power. If you're a socialist, you want to have a more community-oriented distribution of resources, an ethic as to how people view themselves as members of society. In all of these different left-wing ideologies, the collective is presumed as sacrosanct. So this is why you can have a woke leftist, which I think is the newest variation of leftism. Because there's plenty of variations. It's the newest because wokeism is a new phenomenon, relatively. New in the past 50, 60 years. Whereas progressivism is past 100, 200 years. The roots of it, at least, past 100, 200 years. And so wokeism, taking the class model, the collective model of progressivism and socialism and communism and Marxism, can then go ahead and say, okay, if this sort of class conflict, group-based conflict, which elevates collective or a particular set of collectives, in the case of the woke intersectionalist, the people based on sexuality, disability status, gender, race, whatever, those are the sort of set of collectives that the woke really elevate in their discourse. If these are the goal, if elevating them and beating back the forces of oppression, the oppressors that have oppressed these particular groups throughout history is our goal, then what need do you have to debate? You're a warrior. You're not a thinker. You're a soldier. People on the left don't debate, and watch this, we're going to clip this. People on the left oftentimes don't debate because their ideology does not presume debate. It presumes conflict. And not the conflict of ideas, but the conflict of physical means, the conflict of power, the conflict of getting power over your opponents and then imposing your viewpoint upon other people. I'll say that again. Many leftists oftentimes don't debate because their ideologies don't presume the importance of sussing out the truth and pursuing different ideas beyond their paradigms, but it presumes the conflict of power. You think of any left-wing ideology, progressivism, for example. Who were the villains? The big fat cats, the Rockefellers who had all this money, supposedly, and were hoarding it and were doing bad things from it. They are creating inequality, and therefore we have to take their labor, take their resources, and appropriate it to be more equal. The Marxists, who are their enemies? The bourgeoisie, which have been, that single word has been used to justify the mass slaughter of millions throughout history. Look at the Russian Civil War. Vladimir Lenin versus the whites. Look at that. They were fighting the bourgeoisie. They ended up murdering a lot of people. Not saying that Tsar Nicholas was any better. He wasn't. He was a mass murderer, had pogroms, killed a bunch of Jewish people. It was terrible. But at least Tsar Nicholas wasn't promising to bring heaven on earth. At least he was just a traditionalist Russian conservative. Had no really strong ideological presuppositions. But Lenin and his friends, oh man, they were going to sort of hasten this process of the overthrow of the bourgeoisie, and they did it through immoral means, mass executions, killing, all kind of stuff. That's why leftists don't debate, because their premises don't presume debate. It presumes power. It presumes the pursuit of power. So, understanding that, we come back to this problem that Karl Popper talked about in his book, The Open Society and Its Enemies. And Popper says that there is this paradox of tolerance. The idea that we should have a tolerant society is a moral value that any good society should cling to. But how does this tolerant society respond to the intolerant? And this is kind of the critique that the right kind of makes of the classical liberalism of old. Does this society of tolerance tolerate the intolerant? If so, you're allowing the intolerant means to take over the society and destroy the tolerant society. Does the tolerant society do not tolerate the intolerant? Well, in that case, you're not tolerant, are you? You're not really holding true to your virtues. It's a paradox. You're stuck in a circle. You can't get out. Now, Popper didn't use this to justify censorship or suppression of dissident political ideologies like he very well could have. It would have flowed from the premises, although it would have been wrong morally. But he posed it for all of us to answer, and I think I found an answer to it, I think. A society, a collection of individuals in the private sphere, i.e. in the sphere that is divorced from the processes of political power, can afford to have differing ideas within its midst. But a polity, a government, they don't have as much liberty as the society has. Do you see that? A society can afford to have this conflict of visions. But when it comes to who gets political power, you can't really have the same conflict of visions and maintain the integrity of that society. You must, and this is going to sound really weird, but you must have a set of politicians with a similar moral framework who then use that to inform how they. Christian, does this mean we have to ban certain people from politics? This means that certain people are not made to be politicians. That's correct. And this means that there is a legitimate interest in ensuring that only a set of people have the ability to be politicians. This is a radical idea. This has a lot of implications. People have even called me post-liberal for thinking this. No. Because we all have the right to express ourselves. That is a natural right that no one can bridge. You don't have the right to run for political office. You have the right to select people. Well, okay. Let me backtrack. Because I really don't think that voting is a right. I think it's a privilege. Okay, let me backtrack. The consent of the governed is a requirement for moral government to occur. So you have some ability to select people, but you don't have the ability to be the right to be in office. Think about this. The Constitution says you have to be at least 35 years old to be a president. If being president was a right, you could be president at age 1. What's the problem? What's the issue? It's a right. Okay, not age 1. Let's be more charitable. Age 18. What's the issue? It's a right.
Yeah.
No, it's not. The American system of government doesn't even presume that holding political office is a right. If you have not been in a particular jurisdiction for X amount of years, you can't run for office. If you don't live in the district you represent, you can't run for office. This is in the Constitution. So what I'm saying actually isn't so radical. It's just that how I'm saying it shocks people's sensibilities because there's not a deep understanding of proper political order. There's not. There really isn't. So if it was up to me, I would have a philosophical test that everyone has to pass in order to become a politician in America on the federal level. Now, the federal government has no right to compel the states to do what it wants to do. It's federalism. I believe in separation of powers. I believe in subsidiarity, localization. Subsidiarity is a means to ensure that centralized tyranny does not occur. So I wouldn't touch the states. But on a federal level, I would say this. If you do not affirm the validity of natural law, if you do not affirm, at the very least, the fact of human freedom, if you do not affirm, at the very least, the fact of free will, you should not be eligible for president, for senator, or for Congress at all. Now, again, this is a very extreme position, but it is in line with the tradition espoused by our founders in our founding documents. Because if there are already qualifications that you have to meet to become president, senator, congresspeople, why can't we just add the moral foundations which actually animate our republic to those qualifications? Does this mean everyone has to think the same? No. No. You had the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, the Constitutional Convention, many of whom believed in natural law, many of whom believed in these things, but they had radically different visions on how to pursue them. That would be allowed. That's needed. You can't have single-minded people who are dogmatists and there's no conflict in that area and have a good system. Everything requires refinement. Refinement helps make something better, including people. You refine yourself by going to the gym and pushing hard or eating healthy and doing things. You refine yourself by challenging yourself to different perspectives, and that's fine. But within government, because we're talking about political power here, we're not talking about academia. We're talking about political power that has the ability to transform the very existence of a nation. In government, you must affirm certain moral ideas if your rule can be legitimate. So if it was up to me, I would ban anyone who did not believe in those things I told you about. Natural law, consent of the governed, free will, from being president, from being Congress, from being senator. I would amend the Constitution, I would ban them. You can vote, you can debate, you can have free speech. That's not changed. But if you want political power, you better have the right ideas to guide your use of political power. And if you don't, you need to stay away. That's how we fix the paradox of tolerance. That's how we handle a paradox of tolerance. Because at that point, when the intolerant, in that sense, and the intolerant could be like a stand-in for anything. When the intolerant try to gain political power, they can't do it. They're barred. So they'll be forced to stay in the private realm and to speak in the private realm and do things there. Now, some may argue, Christian, they can be even more dangerous in the private realm. Look at BlackRock. Look at all these corporations adopting ESG. And I would say in response to that, look at who a lot of these corporations get subsidies from and tax credits from. Look at who funds a lot of these corporations. Who? Uncle Sam. Yes. Why do you think they feel so empowered to do what they're doing? We don't have a free market society in America. We don't. As much as I wish we, man, I wish we had a free market society. I really do. We don't.
No.
Not even close. We have a mixed economy at best. At worst, we have a command economy that functions indirectly. Let me explain what I mean. General command economies like Cuba, they function the following way. The government has nationalized all the industries, meaning they control all the industries. And if they tell you to produce, you produce. China operated this way for decades before the 90s when they switched over to capital, a hybrid model between this and capitalism, which they have today. If the government says produce, you produce. This ultimately leads to economic disaster. It's not good. It's not a sufficient use of human resources. It's all bad. It's immoral. We already know why it's bad. History's shown us. Soviet Union had this model and they collapsed. Okay. What we have now, though, is not the government nationalizing industry, but the government giving so many tax credits, benefits, and secrets to industry, so much so that they can operate in a manner that they would not have been able to operate in if the government had not provided them so many goodies. So we literally have a command economy through subterfuge, indirectly. People don't realize that. And I actually just came upon this today. I thought about this. I'm like, I haven't heard any people talk about this before. I'm like, Christian, if you think about it, command economies are oftentimes decried because it's very obvious that what they do, right, is deprive you of your economic freedom and direct it in a manner that pleases the committee or the government. But that same thing happens in a less obvious way with the current collusion between private interest, and government interest today. America has a indirect command economy. So people that say, "Oh, this is the failure of material capitalism," yeah, no. I had a friend, not really a friend, but someone who I follow on social media, who all the time talks about how material capitalism is eroding the values of our society and how material capitalism will be the downfall. This is a traditionalist conservative from Britain. I think to myself, interesting. You've pinned a lot of problems that are problems onto a system that in many parts of the world is not fully actualized because of the either complete and utter dereliction of the system. If we look at North Korea, we look at China, we look at a lot of countries, or the hidden influence the government has over that system. So, all in all I can say is that, again, I'm trying to figure out where I was going with this. But, oh, yeah, so I was talking about the left and their foundations. Okay. And I kind of just spouted off into this. This is what happens. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
Oftentimes, when you have all of these presumptions, right, going back to the original question about what your goals are politically, then debate is not on your roster. Achieving your goals is on your roster, which is why I think it's so important to continue to try to foster debate amongst people and foster good free thought amongst people as well. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Because I mean, it's heartbreaking for me because I grew up in a tradition where, I mean, you may or may not have heard of the scholar Richard Neuhaus, who coined the term the naked public square. In other words, we're going to take your side of it, we're going to take my side of it, we're going to meet in the middle. We'll have the debate, and he who wins wins. Well, now it's to the point that via authoritarianism, or you call it command economy, I call it fascism, because we've got the most perverse mix of the government telling what private industry what it will and will not do, or worse yet, what it will and will not say. Twitter, Facebook, and it's heartbreaking, because how are we going to cure the ills if we cannot sit down across the table from each other and say, why do you believe this? Here's what I believe. Here's why I believe this. And, it doesn't get any better. So we're going to switch topics here in just a second. But as we do, we're on about the hour and a half mark. I'm Brian Tripp at the Front Porch Conservative. This is Christian Watson, writer, podcaster, public intellectual, absolutely talented young man. And I'm just having a Jones of a good time in this conversation. Christian, let's switch gears for a second. And I'm sure you're going to remember this story. It's Philadelphia, 1787, and toward the end of the Constitutional Convention, Benjamin Franklin, in his old age, is either walking out or helped out of Independence Hall, and a man stops him on the street because this man's curious about what's been going on now for weeks inside, because these poor men have been sweating probably 5 pounds away a day from the heat of being in that room. And he says, Dr. Franklin, what do we have? What kind of government do we have? And very wryly and very wisely, Franklin said, a republic, if you can keep it. So that gets to my next line of question. We are 200 plus years removed, almost now, 250 removed from the formation of the American Republic. From your vantage point, where are we as a society generally at, as far as either holding on tightly to that which great men have passed down to us through the centuries, or how loosely are we in danger of letting it go and slipping into a form of government that, in our intrinsic bones, we would never tolerate, knowing our own history? The floor is yours.
Well, that's a good question. I think there have been periods of American history line. I think right now we already have crossed that line. Let me paint a picture here. In America in the 21st century, we have a government that has a collection of more data than has ever been assembled in the country of our history. They store in databanks out in, I think, Nevada or Utah, one of those states out there. Mm-hmm. And they use that data whenever they want to, without warrants, without due process, to protect us from national security threats. In 21st century America, we have a military-industrial complex that literally can call favors to politicians, that literally have certain influential members of Congress in their pockets that reimburse them every time America happens to get into a war. Why do you think people say, well, Biden wants to send all this money to Ukraine? Newsflash. Most of that money is not going to Ukraine.
No.
Most of that money is going to reimburse the weapons contractors who send weapons, who make weapons for us that we send over to Ukraine. It's actually in the bills themselves. That's why the price is so high. In 21st century America, we have a dominant cultural illness, which has assembled control of most of our institutions, which has taught people that racism is acceptable if it's under the guise of benevolence. It has taught people that it is okay to bow at the altar of expression over the pursuit of truth. If you feel a certain way and you want to express that, that is preferable over the truth. Your subjective experiences mean more than the truth. That is a predominant cultural sentiment that has ripped through a lot of American institutions. In 21st century America, we have an FBI right now that is emboldened and empowered, more so than it's been in history, because it's done this before, it's not new, that is willing to not only raid the house of a former president, it's also willing to literally concoct stories about a politically motivated investigation into Russia that they knew was bogus, that was ran by a guy who was hired by the Clintons. Oh, but not only that, several of the people in the FBI that were leaking stories from the false investigation to the media were exposed, were charged, like Andrew McCabe, and then allowed to be professional commentators on CNN talking about the very issue they lied about to people. We have in America where the corporate media, largely in many cases, is hand in hand with the power structure and assisted them in literally seducing a population of Americans to relinquish their freedom, to relinquish their common sense, and to literally relinquish their devotion and duty to their loved ones during the COVID-19 pandemic, and send us into a place of mass psychosis for a few years that many people will not recover from. The new generation of kids that had to go through schooling at that point in time who were not able to, they will be impacted by this for the rest of their lives. Their entire perception of the world will. We live in an America. I can keep going on and on and on. I can list everything that I think is threatening us right now. And none of it would even compare to the simple uniting fact behind all those things I just mentioned. And the uniting fact is this: the American people let it happen. Mm-hmm. After 9/11, the American people allowed a Department of Homeland Security, which has been in existence only for 22 years. I was born before the Department of Homeland Security was in existence. It was established after 9/11. We allowed the Department of Homeland Security, which violates the Constitution every single day, to be set up on our homeland. We have allowed the FBI, the CIA, and these other organizations within the deep state to lie and deceive Americans, and to do so for the benefit of particular political powers. We have allowed military weapons contractors to send us into wars or to influence us to go into wars, as opposed to asserting national sovereignty in that respect. We have allowed cultural ideologies that are anti-American to overtake our institutions. We have allowed it. We have allowed it. Were there people fighting back? Of course there were, but not enough people. Not enough. I say I want a revolution of the mind. What I mean by that is that I want people to literally think more philosophically about these issues and research more and do more critical thinking. But I can't do it alone. I'm not a messiah. I need people who are actually going to come out here and help me. You know, I envision one day, I want there to be Watson centers for learning around the country. And let me give you my lofty vision. Okay. Because like Tim Pool is wanting to set up all these coffee shops. Okay, I want to do these like pseudo library public spaces where like on the top of the building, there's like 2 stories. On top of the building, there's like a library full of like natural law literature and great philosophers and political writing from like the 20th century, all kind of stuff. And then at the bottom is like, you know, maybe like a small little coffee area, a lobby, And there's a discussion room where people can literally go and partake in the revolution of the mind in their local communities. One day, I want my media empire to be as big enough to be able to finance at least one of these centers in every major city in America across the country. I want that to happen. But even that would require people to come in and help out. It would require a mass cultural interest of people in America. There are not enough people trying to understand what's going on today. We are more than happy, many of us, to be slaves to the algorithm. We are more than happy, many of us, to sell our kids to the algorithm. Do you know how many kids are on TikTok blindly watching things they don't understand, being manipulated by the algorithm? We are allowing ourselves, our sense of self, our sense of community, to be distorted by the digital era, which makes everything seem so simple, so distant, while claiming to connect you through social media. I'm no troglodyte, but I understand the consequences of every new thing. Every good thing has a downside. The internet has been a great thing, but it has a downside. It has made us closer by making us further apart. It has reduced our understanding of what is proper and what is correct between people by numbing you to corrective by putting a screen in thousands or hundreds of miles distance between you and the person you're talking to. Or even that, allowing you to be completely anonymous and assume an alias that doesn't reflect your true person or your true values, so people become perpetual actors every day. Sorry, go on.
It has destroyed community by creating community.
Yes. In a few words, yes. So there are just so many forces that I just sit back, and I sit back right here with my books and everything. I'm just like, God. I say, God, how in the world, and I'm a Christian, so I'm going to say, God, you said you're not going to give me anything more than I can handle. How in the world do you deal with this kind of stuff? Of course, I don't really get a response in the direct sense. But I do feel this sense of motivation fill my body when I ask that question. And I feel this sense of myself that, Christian, people like you are the answer. People like Front Porch Conservative are the answer. People that actually care enough to read, study, and put their thoughts out there. That's the answer. You have to do it in mass secession, though. You have to do it in mass secession enough to reach enough people to push them towards caring or thinking or considering at least one of the things you say. But I think everything I mentioned to you, I mentioned a whole list of things. From the internet, digital age, to the power structure, to the current condition of our culture, it all feeds into each other. And all of it, I think, displays bad omens for our future if we don't get ahead of it. Now, I think that we can get ahead of it. We can. It's not impossible. We can easily reverse, well, not easily, we can start to reverse the tide here. But it's going to require people to be proactive. When you see an influencer, I tell people, these influencers you see online, a lot of them don't give you fruit. What does fruit do? Fruit nourishes and fulfills your nutritional needs. Well, a lot of these influencers don't give you fruit. They're tickling your ears and telling you exactly what you want to hear, and by virtue of that, keeping you in the same spot you were when you first tuned into them. They're not advancing you.
No.
They're keeping you where they want you to be so they can become powerful and rich off of you. I don't just go in front of my camera and say, oh, I'm going to own the libs today, guy. I don't do that. I go in front of my camera and say, we need a revolution of the mind. You need to think. And there are people who responded a different way to that than they would if you just throw red meat towards them. People respond differently. A lot of folks shut down. What of the mind? What's a revolution? And they'll just shut down. Click, bye. Some folks say, oh, this is interesting, but it's a little bit too much for me. Fair, I understand. Click, bye. Some folks say, you know what? Let me try to ride this out. Let me try to understand this. And they stay along for the ride. But somewhere in transit, they may say, you know what? I'm not good enough for this. They believe lies about themselves, that they value the self-esteem. We really need a resurgence of self-esteem because right now, mental illness and mental disorder and self-hatred are popularized and worshipped in our society. on TikTok or on social media, it's cool to have a mental illness. People define themselves by their depression or their anxiety. Well, I had this anxiety disorder, and they kind of praise it, make it a special thing. And that's just not how it should be, in my opinion. And I say as someone who deals with depression, has dealt with depression his entire life, as far as I've been conscious. This is not something to be praised, something to be understood and handled by empowering yourself and building up who you are as a person, not by languishing in your deficit. No. So we need self-esteem to come back in our nation, I think. But yeah, I just, there are just so many different forces right now conspiring against us. And if people aren't giving you fruit to nourish your needs, you're going to find what you think you want in things that don't give you what you need. I'll say that again. If people don't give you fruit to nourish your needs, you're going to find what you think you want in things that you don't actually need. That is, if I could summarize everything I just said into one sentence, it would be that. That is it 100% entirely. And so a lot of these influencers, I don't listen to them. I won't call anyone out. People are like, do you listen to so-and-so or so-and-so? I'm like, no. Why not? Like, no. Oh, did you hear what so-and-so did today? I saw so-and-so had a feud with a person, and oh my gosh, they're fighting. No, I don't know anything about that. No. Why not? Because what's going on with you? Aren't you a commentator? Like, yeah, I am. You know what? I showed my ears from that mess. Because first of all, in this industry, you have no idea who's going to be a blessing to you. You have no idea who's going to tap you on your shoulder one day and say, hey, come on my show, or hey, talk to me. So I don't know anybody, so I don't talk about anybody. Whenever I hear gossip, oh, did you hear what so-and-so did? Oh, did you hear? No, bye. I did not. And I got to go. Well, come on, just something. No. I have got to go. Unless you have something to give me that's going to empower my life and empower my journey, I have got to go. Oh, Christian, you're just so uptight. No, you can keep staying in the place you are. I'm trying to climb the mountain. That's my immediate response. Whenever I hear talk, well, did you hear what he did? Oh, he got fired because he did this. Oh, he has this channel. No, I don't know anything about that. No. Even if I do know something about it, I'm like, no, I don't know anything about it. No. No. I shut my ears to that crap because it's not good for you. But it's what a lot of people indulge in these days. They indulge in that nonsense. So I'll be frank with you. I don't listen to a lot of folks. I listen to Glenn Beck. Let me think. And I listen to Oak Clip the Firing Line. That's it. And the only reason I even listen to Glenn Beck is because I grew up with him. I grew up watching him on Fox. That's the only reason I listen to that. So I don't listen. When I'm on YouTube, I normally am watching like nature documentaries and like true crime videos and stuff. Like I'm watching those people. I'm not even looking at politics. A lot of the people. A few years ago, I used to listen to a lot of people. A lot of folks. I listen to Robert Gavia as well. I like him. I listen to some of the law. I'm not being totally honest. I like Robert Barnes and Viva Fry and law tubers. They're good. They're kind of like my foundation for legal stuff. But it's more of they give information rather than I worship them. And I've listened to your content as well because you have some interesting conversations as well. Thank you. I don't, the big name like Ben Shapiro and Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh and Steven Crowd, I don't listen to those people. I don't have any interest. I'm so sorry, I'm not interested. I know they're all big and I'm not interested. I don't know what they can offer to me. I'm trying to read some of the gentlemen that helped form the ideas that birthed our republic. I have a high standard for who I'm going to listen to. And it's not me being uptight. It's just me saying, how am I going to give fruit to people? How am I going to edify people if I'm not in a place to be edified myself?
Absolutely.
If I'm feeding my soul garbage, how am I going to do that? I can't do it. So I have a duty to be very careful about what I listen to and what I spend my time indulging in. I hope the folks in the crowd and the audience agree. Yeah, that's my hope. Because I'm not trying to be dismissive. I'm not trying to be condescending or pessimistic or nothing like that. I'm just being honest about what helps me. So, yeah.
You know, 2 or 3 things in response to that. Talking about how we as a country reacted after 9/11. It takes me back. I think it was John Dickinson of Pennsylvania. Those who would surrender liberty for safety get neither, or it's Franklin may have been. Is either Dickinson or Franklin. Those who would surrender liberty for safety get neither. And we did that. We had a moment where our world was just fractured. The safety, the security of Pax Americana was just absolutely taken down in the space of about 4 hours by 25 or 30 highly motivated individuals with 4 airplanes and 4 different targets. 3 of them hit their target, 1 of them went down in Pennsylvania. I will say this, and I don't want you to be a messiah. I don't want me to be a messiah. I don't want Viva Fry to be a messiah or Robert Barnes or anybody else. I do think, however, that in those moments, be it yourself, myself, um, we are not alone. And this is a conversation that I started to have with another person on social media. You've probably heard of her, Carrie Smith, the queen of the good hat, as I love to call her. She is one of the genuinely sweetest people on God's earth. And I've got a personal theory that we are reaching a point where, because of the madness that swirls around us societally and as a nation, that there is this intellectual spot. And there's a whole bunch of people that are coming to the same place via different paths. And I'll give you an example. On the political front, you got the Steve Bannons, the Peter Navarros, others. They're coming to the spot. You got on the cultural side people like Nerdrotic, the gang from Geeks and Gamers, Ryan Kennel.
Massive influencers. Those guys have
Massive.
more influences than a lot of these political talking heads. Massive influencers.
Absolutely. From the free speech side, you've got Anthony Cumia and Chrissy Mayer and Gino Biscotti, and they're coming to the spot. You got Carrie Smith, the walkaway movement, and everybody's looking around at each other going, I know why I'm here, but what the hell are you doing here? And the other person looks back and goes, I was going to ask you the exact same thing. But everybody's starting to realize, the more they start talking to each other, that we agree on more than we. Yeah, that's right, Ripa. How can I forget Ripa?
Okay, let me give a tribute. I don't want to interrupt you, Brian, but I have to tribute Ripa for a second. So, again, as I said, I don't follow his content daily, but I used to be a big fan. I still am a fan. I don't have anything against him. He's a great guy, but I want to tribute him because what he's doing on the comic book front. Now, I'm a huge comic book nerd. Huge. Yeah. I have a stack of them in my closet right now. I'm a big fan of a lot of the 80s comics like Amethyst and all that kind of stuff. I have a lot of old Amethyst comics and some of the new editions as well. I also like a few some cartoon comics like Mighty Mouse, that kind of stuff. And I also like some Star Wars comics. I like a bunch of them just in my room. Sure, so a lot of Green Lantern trilogies in my room, all kind of good stuff. I'm really into that stuff. I grew up watching Justice League, all that kind of stuff. And when Young Rick said, I'm going to start a alternative to the woke comic companies, I said, okay, is this going to be an amateur hour event, or is this going to be a professional shot in across the bow to these legacy comic companies? It was a shot across the bow in the best way possible, and it continues to be. So I am impressed with him. I praise his efforts, and I think that he deserves all the success that he has in the world.
Absolutely. And the beautiful part about it is, we're finding out that there's more that we agree on than we disagree on, and we're realizing this is not going to last forever. Oh, yes, they might have power right now. They might have control of institutions right now, but it's unsustainable. It's void. It is empty. It is soulless. It doesn't matter what institution you're talking about. It will fall under its own weight because there's no moral foundation that sustains it to make it something that can perpetuate beyond itself. They're going to try and destroy. Lord knows they're doing their best. But I think in the end, we are at a unique inflection point in history, intellectually and generationally. I saw your video with regard to the revolt against career politicians. And although you started to touch on the question of age, McConnell, Feinstein, and all the others, I agree with you. We are absolutely at a generational inflection point, an intellectual inflection point, a cultural inflection point, and whichever path we choose to go down is going to determine the destiny of the United States for the next century. And I'm in my heart of hearts, although the days are dark, you know, to borrow an old line from the Psalms, weeping endures for the night and joy cometh in the morning. So I think joy is
Oh, hold
coming.
on. Yes, say it again, please. Say it again. That's one of the most important things in the Bible. Say it again, please.
It's from the Psalms, and it's one half of a verse, and it's weeping endures for the night, but joy cometh in the morning.
And even if you're not a Christian, because I have an audience that is not Christian, I have some people that are not Christian, some are. Even if you're not a Christian, you should be able to appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's aspiration. Aspiration is simply a vision that has a little bit of work behind it. That's all aspiration is.
Yeah. So yeah, we're at a very unique point, and in my heart of hearts, I think the joy of the dawn is coming. One last question, we'll bring this thing to a wrap. Your boy Vivek, your man Vivek, I tell you what, I'm going to put this up on screen for folks who may not have seen this today. Let me find it here real fast. Hang on. Real Clear Politics, a poll from Senegal. Yeah, that guy named the Donald. Yeah, he's got a big lead. But notice who's number 2. Mr. Ramaswamy.
Yeah, this was inevitable. Look, I was saying as far back, and I have tweets of it, proof. I said that Vivek Ramaswamy will be the 2024 presidential nominee for the Republican Party. People laughed at me. Less are laughing at me, but people are still laughing at me. I thought there was a piece from Matt Tabash, some kind of political satirist, I guess, some kind of analyst. I don't know. He doesn't do a good job at what he does. I'm not impressed. Anyway, but he made this piece of the Substack that has a lot of readers apparently, and he said that, oh no, Vivek ain't gonna be nothing. He's a con artist. He's a scam artist. Da 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 da. And he wasn't even just regurgitating mainstream media lies about him that have unfortunately infected certain areas of the conservative right, and just having them worm through. No. Look, when he says that people are hungry for deeper purpose and meaning, what he's not saying explicitly, but he's saying by implication that the current way that we conduct our politics in our society and here in America is not working for our eternal souls. It's not working for our deeper desires. And so that's why I say these influencers, man, these people with huge followings that don't give them fruit, they are like clouds with no rain.
Yeah.
Because what do clouds do? They cover things. But if they give you rain, they can nourish and sustain you. These influencers, right? These modern influencer classes, like clouds with no rain, they don't sustain you. They don't build you up. They just block your ability to see what is beyond them and the world they've created for you to be in, to stay in, to feed in, to make them rich. So I kind of feel that I have a mandate now that someone like Ramaswamy is running, that I have a mandate to do what I'm doing. Because I've been doing this channel and this goal of trying to become public election for 3 years now. I've been through 2 presidential election cycles as a content creator. I did a live stream covering the night of the 2020 presidential election, doing commentary on it. That live stream, unfortunately, has been taken down because the person I did it with, they stopped doing YouTube, but I did like a 7-hour, 8-hour live stream where I sat in my college dorm covering the results as they came in. So I've been through an election cycle. I've been through a midterm election cycle. I've been through a lot of cultural events in between and after. So I've been at this before Vivek even was a prospect. But I now finally feel, almost 4 years into my journey, that I have a mandate to do what I'm doing. Because people have been waking up. The signal has been boosted for people to want that deeper hunger in their politics.
Yeah.
So I'm actually eternally grateful for Vivek for that reason. Because the largest video I've done on my channel, 20,000 views, was a video of me covering Vivek's interview on The Breakfast Club. That was 4 weeks ago. 20,000 views. Gave me a boost that I desperately needed. It was just me talking. Me, but this background behind me, 25 minutes. They always tell me, Christian, do shorter videos. 25 minutes of Christian Watson philosophy with only a few interview pieces cut in. 20,000 views, 1.3 thousand likes, almost 1,000 comments. What in the world? So, from a personal standpoint, I'm so happy Vivek's running.
Yeah.
From a cultural standpoint, his emergence is very important because I think that a lot of people are finally, for the first time in a while, becoming aware of the forces that actually direct the course of American politics. The deep state, the managerial, which has many names throughout history, whether it be the administrative state, the managerial class. This is a very old structure, a very old phenomenon. They've been around for a long time, over 120 plus years, a long time, starting with the progressive era. So this is not new. They've just had different faces, different people that are in it. So people are realizing that this class collaborates with other areas of society, the experts and institutions that are also act like government bodies to direct the course of society. It's not a conspiracy, it's just fact.
Yeah.
And people realize that these forces have been in the driver's seat of our country for a very long time. And the politicians we elect have been literally selling us down the river to them willingly, with smiling all the way to the bank. So Vivek, just like Trump, represents a massive backlash to that kind of political mediocrity we've been living in for decades. I remember, since I've been politically conscious, I used to tune in on Fox and CNN when I was like 12 or 13 years old, and they'd be talking about the debt ceiling this, debt ceiling that. And we got to raise the debt ceiling. And John Boehner, remember him? John Boehner, when he was speaker, he came on the laurels of the Tea Party movement. The Tea Party was beautiful. If we can get that again, that was beautiful. He came in the laurels of the Tea Party movement, and he promised he was going to be a fiscal conservative. What did John Boehner do? Several times, he raised the debt ceiling and sold our country down to a path of fiscal responsibility at the behest of Obama. Happily negotiated with him. And today, when he goes on his little book tours, he'll say, well, I was just doing my job. I negotiated and I got things for my people. No. You continue to set our country up for fiscal unsustainability. I always remember Sean Hannity on the nightly show saying, hold the line, don't raise the debt ceiling. Even he was saying it. And if he's saying something, I mean, even he is saying it, and that should really tell you something, because he oftentimes has some bad takes. But if even he is saying something, that should tell you something. They didn't do it. They didn't do it. They walked hand in hand with the spend progressives, and we are currently paying for it. People think that all this inflation is just Biden's fault. A lot of it is, but not all of it. Biden did institute a regime of sanctions, which greatly crippled the world economy, which also caused supply chain crises, which increased the amount of inflation. That is 100% true. But everything that's been happening over the past 12 or so years, the past decade, has been leading up to this point. Because when you think that when you are fiscally irresponsible enough to raise our borrowing limit and keep borrowing when we can't pay back, if you are fiscally irresponsible enough to do a lot of other bad things, that's just the antecedent to you doing even worse things that ultimately lead to the conclusion that we saw about a year ago with all that inflation and everything, chipping away at American savings and things of that sort. So I really don't forgive the Tea Party Republicans that got in and didn't do what they said they were going to do. They lied. I mean, either them lied or they got cold feet and just ran away. Very few of them remain consistent. So, yeah, I just, Vivek and Trump are a response to those kind of things, a response to that kind of error in our political history. We need to continue this. We need to keep this going. Because if we can continue this momentum, I genuinely believe that we can restore the republic to its proper condition.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, I'm like you. People always are like, people ask me all the time, be it family members or friends of mine, it's like, why do they hate Trump so much? Or why do they hate Vivek so much? Why do they hate people who aren't in the political system? And it basically, my answer is very simple. Because they're bad for business. And people say, well, no, they're economic concern. I said, no. That's not the business I'm talking about. It's the business of politics, or let me rephrase it. It's the business of enrichment through politics. Now, I'm not saying Trump is any kind of perfect political saint. And that's one of the frustrations that I have in this day and age is everybody's like, oh, he or she, doesn't matter what office or what you're talking about. They didn't do this, they didn't do that. I said, what did you think you were voting for? God? No, you voted for a politician. Politicians are going to fail you. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter their best intentions. They will try to keep their promises whenever possible, but they're not going to get everything done you want. And it just it boggles the mind to me that we're putting so much we put so much into a politician thinking, oh, they're going to be the Messiah. They're going to no, 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 no. Remember where you came from. Madison
Yes.
hated the idea of power centralized in the hands of a small group of people in the government. He deliberately set up a system that's slow, contrary, that is deliberative in theory, or more the point should be, slow, mechanical, plotting, like the turning of a gears in a machine. That's how the federal government is designed to operate. Trump and Vivek and others are bad for the business of self-enrichment because the system is set up right now, or being manipulated, I should say, to the benefit of a handful of people through their ability to maneuver and manipulate laws and the system for their own self-enrichment. Does anybody really think that Joe Biden made $150 million over the course of 50 years in American politics because he was a good and faithful public servant? Does anybody think Mitch McConnell is as wealthy as he is because he served as a senator from Kentucky since 1984? Come on, people. I mean, not that I'm trying to get into the weeds or conspiratorial here, but it's painfully obvious.
No, I totally agree with you. And so I think, and of course, we got to wrap this up because I got to get going in a few minutes here. But no, I think that just to close off here, it's important for all of us to realize one fundamental truth is that there's political interest and then there is moral interest. And we should expect all of our candidates to have a moral interest fundamentally.
Absolutely.
And if they don't, they're not good enough for America. They're not good enough for your vote. They're not good enough for your consideration. They're not even fit to hold office. And so I believe that if we have a revolution of the mind in this nation, which I'm hoping to lead, maybe you'll be a part of it as well. You'll be leading your own part of it as well. If we have a revolution of the mind in this country, we can really push the needle in that respect. We can do things that many people have thought impossible before. Maybe we can have a two-party 2.0 that actually gets the job done this time. So thank you so much again for having me. It's been wonderful. I mean, seriously, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate your interest in my content and my work, and I will continue to follow your work and your content as well. So just thank you so much. And yeah, I'm just so humbled. So thank you so much.
Well, no, thank you for coming. As I tell all my guests, if I invite you on my electronic front porch, you are welcome back here anytime you want. And like I say, I don't expect every person who I have a conversation with to agree with me on every jot and tittle, but at least the door is open. Let's talk, let's collaborate, let's work together. If you ever got something that's burning on your soul and you're like, I want to go talk about it with someone, let me know. And dude, you come back anytime you want to. I'd love to have you on here. Where can people find you on the internet, on social media? Where can they follow you? What can they do to support you? And if they're not if you're not sub to this man's channel, what's the matter with you? Please give this man a sub if you're not doing it already. You're missing out. So where can people find you? What can they do to help you?
They can subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is going to be Christian Watson, and just type politics at the end just so you can find me, actually, Christian Watson Politics. Go to my Twitter, which is going to be @officialC and Watson. Those are the two best places. And I'll say this, I'll make the same offer. If you want to come on my channel and do an interview, you are more than welcome. We can have the same format, live show, and I am more than happy to interview you and talk to you about whatever issue is burning on your soul as well. I believe that these kind of things have to continue to happen if we're going to really get this revolution of the mind that I really want to. And you can bring on anyone else you want to as well. If you want to just be you, or I'll have friends that you have that want to come talk as well, I'm more than happy. I want to share my platform and share my growth with other people as well that I think deserve it. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Folks, you have been here for a session of Chatting on the Porch. On my channel, we're going to be back Saturday morning for Front Porch Brunch, which is our review of the news from the previous week. Again, if you're not subscribed to Christian Watson, either on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, anywhere, go out and give this man a sub. Follow his work. I've got a feeling that in the years to come, he is going to be one of the leading intellectual voices in this country that's leading us in a much better direction than where we're going right now. Thank you so much, everybody, for stopping by. Christian, hang on for just a second. We'll say some proper goodbyes. Everybody, thank you so much for stopping in for Chatting on the Porch. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your Front Porch Conservative, and we will see you next time.